Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Be seated. We're ready to proceed. Thank you all for being here on time. We did clear up a few minor legal matters, so we're ready to proceed with the continued cross-examination of Dr. Hassan. Officer, can you bring Dr. Hassan in, please? Thank you. Hi, Doctor. Welcome back. I'm going to ask you to remain standing because we had a break. We're going to re-swear you. You've been through this before. I can see that. Raise your right hand. Please listen.
Do you swear in the presence of Almighty God that the testimony given to this court regarding this matter shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Do.
Please state your name and spell your last name for the record.
My name is Charles S. Hasson, Hasson.
Thank you.
All right, Doctor. Be seated. Mr. Shellhorn, you may continue your cross-examination.
Thank you, Judge. Good afternoon, Doctor.
Good afternoon.
I think where we left off yesterday, I was asking you some questions about the DSM. Would you agree with me that there's no diagnosis in the DSM that's dispositive of any legal standard?
I don't know about that. I doubt it. Because psychiatric diagnoses and legal standard are two separate domains, so they may not overlap.
So meaning that if you find or diagnose someone with a specific diagnosis, that doesn't automatically mean they meet a legal standard?
Well, first of all, I spelled out in my report in a lot of detail that when you're doing a report, you have to determine the purported, forensic report, the purported intent of the action. Then what you have to do is to link the purported intent with the diagnosis, those two. Then the third step is to take those two factors, the diagnosis, the purported intent, and then relate it to either diminished capacity or a criminal responsibility. So if you skip the steps, rather than getting, do step one or step two, you have to do all three. So it's, to answer you directly, unless you spell it out, there's no set standard for a relationship between diagnosis and the legal standard.
Meaning that just because you diagnose someone with delusional disorder, it doesn't automatically mean they meet a legal standard?
I think on page 25 of your book, they point out the fact that these are the steps you have to do. You have to relate the diagnosis to some kind of functional deficit, relate the functional deficit to the diagnosis.
So I think you're saying that you agree with me.
I don't know what I'm sorry to say it this way, but I'm not sure I fully understand what you're thinking.
And maybe just try answering my question.
Diagnosis does not necessarily mean that it meets a particular standard. You have to demonstrate, according to DSM-5, the steps along the way, how you went from the purported intent, the diagnosis, those two factors, and then related to the legal statute.
So if someone is diagnosed with delusional disorder, it doesn't automatically mean that they meet a legal standard?
Correct. You have to demonstrate the connection. That's stated clearly in the DSM-5.
Now, you were aware of Dr. Simmering's diagnoses before you rendered your opinion?
Yes.
And you agreed with him that this defendant suffers from delusional disorder, persecutory type?
Yes.
You would agree that a person with delusions is capable of knowing right versus wrong?
It depends on the situation, because paranoid delusions is a dimension. And I said the other day, it goes from normal population into very disturbed people. So it depends on what part of that normal curve you're talking about.
You'd agree with me that a person with delusions could understand the nature and quality of their actions?
You totally have to spell that out a lot more. It depends on the circumstance. There's not like a black or white type of delusional disorder. There's dimensionality here.
Doctor, how do you define a delusion?
I mentioned the other day, it's a belief based on incorrect thinking. There's an experience, then there's a belief based on incorrect thinking that comes to a conclusion that the person is not going to change no matter what kind of argument you give. So it's a thought that was produced incorrectly. I gave examples when I interviewed Mr. Barisone of the odd thinking that he had. And I thought it was an unusual, finding, but then I see that some other people completely independent of me, but on a much higher level, have observed the same thing with regards to delusions, that it's a cognitive processing difficulty. Someone from University of Hawaii has written extensively on that, but I didn't know that before I observed those behaviors in him.
So would you agree with me that a delusion is a false belief?
It's a false belief, yes.
What is Michael Barisone's specific delusion?
Well, I touched on it yesterday and instead of fireworks. He believes that if he or Mary Haskins was incarcerated for some purported some purported DIFUS violation, that the children were going to be hunted down and killed. He felt that very strongly. I don't believe that, but,
So his specific delusion was
it's not,
related...
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Thank you. So his specific delusion, in your opinion, is related to an incarceration arising from the DCP?
It's so much broader than that. His delusion is this incredible fear. He's frightened that he will be, his life, Mary Haskins' life, the children's life will be snuffed out. That's why he sent the boy to North Carolina. He was frightened. He got very upset when he saw that Robert Goodwin was searching the internet for information regarding the children. He took that information and misconstrued it.
Doctor, didn't I? I see counsel sign.
No evidence.
Doctor, from now on. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, I need to strike that answer. It's an improper answer. I struck it yesterday. I'm striking it again today, and hopefully we won't hear it again. You understand that, Doctor?
Correct.
There's no evidence supporting that. Well, please disregard it. Don't consider it in your deliberations. Ask your next question.
Doctor, if you don't understand my question, please just ask me to rephrase it, and I'll do the best that I can.
I will.
So
And
my
even-
specific...
And even if you understand the question, just answer his question to the best of your ability. If Mr. Balinkas needs to follow up with you, he'll follow up. We call that redirect. Answer the prosecutor's question.
So my question is not about the basis for your opinion. My question was, what is the specific delusion that you have diagnosed for Michael Barisone?
He feels his life is threatened by Lauren Canorac and Robert Goodwin.
When did that delusion, that specific delusion, start?
Well, it started over a period of time. I would say well over a month. It gradually increased in intensity, but it wasn't just like 2 days. It was well over several weeks, or many weeks.
What specific piece of evidence do you rely on that the delusion began well over a month before the shooting?
Well, no one can tell exactly when the delusion began, but based on his responding to information he was told, he read, and things that occurred, it made him more and more frightened.
You didn't identify in your report a specific piece of evidence that shows that the delusion began well over a month before the shooting.
I didn't, no, I did not.
And you'd agree with me that among the diagnostic criteria for delusional disorder is that the delusion existed for at least 1 month.
Yes, I understand that.
Now, you found that the defendant suffers from a subtype of delusional disorder, persecutory type.
Yes.
What are the symptoms or characteristics of persecutory type delusional disorder?
Well, as it says, he feels as if there's a danger out there. He feels threatened personally. He feels that all the things he's doing are being monitored, and he feels as if that someone can plan to kill him.
And I'm not talking about Michael Barisone in particular. I'm talking in general.
In
What are
general-
the characteristics of
in
the
general-
subtype of persecutory
In
delusional
general,
disorder?
the person believes that there's some threat in the outside environment to him. And if it was analyzed by other people, people would not come up with that conclusion.
So it's a false belief that the person is in danger that other people don't agree with.
Correct. The last part I didn't follow, that other people don't agree with?
Wasn't the last part of your last answer that if other people didn't see it,
Well,
or other people would try to talk the person out of it?
yes,
So you'd agree with me that persecutory type delusional disorder could be characterized by a person having a false belief that there was a danger to themselves that other people didn't agree with.
yes. That's broadly speaking about it.
Now, you indicated earlier that you received a version of events from Michael Barisone.
Yes,
And was that both in combination with your interviews with him, as well as reviewing the written statements that he gave to Dr. Simring?
yes,
You'd agree with me that by the time you met with him, he had received discovery in this case?
yes,
And you'd agree with me that by the time he wrote those statements for Dr. Simring, he had received discovery in this
Objection.
case?
How does he know?
Yeah, I'm not sure this witness would know that.
Well, he could say that he doesn't know that.
Do you know that, Doctor?
no.
No, of course not.
Did you ask him that?
Did I ask him when he received the discovery?
Did you ask him, or were you aware if he had access to discovery when he wrote the written statement
No, I
for
don't know
Dr.
about
Simring?
that.
Now, you wrote in your report that among the defendant's fears were that he told police that Lauren Canarak had weapons.
Yes,
Did you listen to any of the 911 calls in this case?
yes,
And you're aware that on July 31st, he was asked if weapons were involved or mentioned, and his response was no.
correct.
Objection, Judge.
Let me see that sidebar.
Dr. Hassan, I'm just going to re-ask the question again because I'm not sure at what point I stopped. But you're aware then that on the July 31st call to 911, the defendant was asked, were any weapons involved or mentioned?
I'm aware he was asked.
And you're aware that he responded no?
Correct.
You're aware that on August 1st, he called 911?
Yes,
And on that call, he was asked if weapons were involved or mentioned, and his response was no?
correct.
You're aware that on August 3rd, he called 911?
Yes,
And he was asked whether weapons were involved or mentioned?
yes.
And his response was, I have not heard a word of that?
Okay.
Are you aware on August 5th that he called 911?
Yes,
And he was asked if weapons were involved or mentioned?
correct.
And his response was, not so far.
Correct.
You also, I think, testified yesterday, and it's in your report, that Michael Barisone told you that he believed Lauren Canarak had declared war on him.
Correct.
On the July 31st call to 911, didn't he indicate, this is war, and I've had enough of these people, I need them gone?
Yes, I read that.
Did you ask him what he meant when he said that it was war with Lauren Canarak?
I took him at his face word about his view that Lauren Canarak had issued some comments earlier that he had read using the word war.
And then after listening to the 911 call from July 31st, where he said, this is war, I've had enough of these people, I need them gone, you didn't ask him what he meant by that?
No,
And you agree with me that on July 31st, when he called 911, or around the time he called 911, he didn't shoot anyone then?
no.
Now, I think, Doctor, you talked in your report and indicated that the defendant was taken to St. Clair's Hospital.
Well, I saw on one of the forms, it said St. Clair's Hospital. Emergency, I put the squad, or.
So that was
It said
that was a mistake in your report.
No, did I say St. Clair's Hospital? It said St. Clair, it was a staff member from St. Clair's.
Well, I can direct you to page 11 of your report, which is S88. And I believe you wrote on the August 7th entry, emergency medical staff at St. Clair's Hospital reported that on arrival,
Correct. The way I interpreted was that these people said, since it said on the form, St. Clair's Hospital, I assumed they were sent from St. Clair's Hospital. That's why I wrote that.
now you also, you referred to that report, that EMT report.
Yes,
I think you testified some yesterday about when you were asked questions about various types of amnesia and psychogenic amnesia, dissociative amnesia. You were asked the question and you responded with an answer about traumatic brain injury. Do you remember that?
correct.
Now, you're aware that there's no diagnosis of traumatic brain injury in this case.
Not from the experts. There was a rule-out diagnosis of TBI with altered mental status.
Who gave that?
One of the
rule out?
doctors, I think the doctor who wrote down the adjustment disorder, he had a rule-out diagnosis of TBI with altered mental state.
But you're aware that nobody actually diagnosed any traumatic brain injury.
Correct.
Doctor, you never asked Michael Barisone about when he first obtained Ruth Cox's gun, did you?
I did.
Is that in your report?
I don't know if it is, but from my recollection, he told me that she came in very late at night, and he asked if she had a weapon, and he thought that the cars could be subject to either scrutiny or being open, and that he thought that she should put the weapon in his safe.
Would it surprise you to know that none of that is in your report?
Okay,
You didn't think that that was a salient detail to include in your report?
I don't think it mattered what time, when, or what time you put it in.
So you don't think him obtaining the gun that he's accused of using to shoot two people several days later, that when he obtained that, you don't think that that matters?
I don't think it's, for at least for me, I don't feel it's pertinent to my conclusion in the case, when he received the gun, when he put it in the safe.
I have no further questions, Judge.
But, redirect.
Doctor, yesterday, the prosecutor was showing you numerous articles and different books with regards to psychiatry. Do you recall those?
Yes, I do.
Is there an equal number of articles and books that say the exact opposite thing that he showed you?
Without a doubt, 200%. As a matter of fact, after I left yesterday, I read the book that Mr. Schellhorn referenced.
And so the record is clear. You had never been shown that book or given advance notice that he was going to show that to you, correct?
Without a doubt. I didn't know about that book. I didn't know about that reference.
Now, did you read that book?
Last night I did. I got it through Kindle, and it explains the mystery.
And what, if anything, would you like to say with regards to that in reference to the specific things that he showed you?
Well, in chapter 3, there was, that's the chapter he showed me.
Judge, not to interrupt, but could we just, so the record is clear, I showed Dr. Hassan a number of things yesterday, but just so the record's clear, he can indicate what he's reading from, which book he's referring to.
This is the book by John, I want to say Bachelor, it's not. I forgot his, Butcher. Yes, James Butcher. John Batchelor is a radio personality, or was. The particular item that Mr. Schellhorn showed me was a paragraph describing paranoid features if someone had a high score on scale 6. And I noticed when I looked at it, there was no numbers in there. It just,
What do you mean no numbers? What do you?
no scores. There was no scores. I was taken aback, and it was so
And
short.
What's the significance of scores?
Well, there's low, medium, and high. They're completely different. There was none of that in there. So I got the book via Kindle last night, and I read that section. Yeah, I understand why. Because the author of the book said, I suggest you look up articles by other experts to get more in-depth information. This is what he wrote. Chapter 3 provides a brief...
Can I just ask what page we're reading from, Judge? I have the book here, so I can follow along.
Well, I have it from location 897 in the book, so I can't tell you. It's somewhere in chapter 3, in the area where you showed me that there were no T-scores. You had me look at that with you.
Continue, Doctor.
Chapter 3 provides a brief overview of each of the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory -2, in parentheses MMPI -2, clinical, content, and supplementary scales in turn. More in-depth information on each of these scales is available in any of the standard MMPI -2 reference books, such as Butcher and Williams, Friedman, Bolinsky, Lewin, Nichols, Graham, and Green. So over here, yes, this is a typical reference book by David Nichols, who was quite nice to me one time when I called him up. Now, if you look in this book, here, it gives specific information on scale 6, and I referenced it in my report. If you're very high on scale 6, paranoia, and you're low on schizophrenia, it suggests that the person has a encrusted delusional disorder. targeted to one particular person. And a high score on scale 6 is indicative or suggestive of a delusional disorder. I gave other references there, but that's what I found yesterday.
Okay, now, with regards to his questions concerning feigning, is it correct if I can simplify the term as someone telling the truth?
Not telling, if you're feigning, you're not telling the truth.
Right, that's what I mean, whether or not someone is telling the truth, correct?
Correct.
Now, with regards to Michael's repeated statements to the first aid people, to the EMS personnel, Morristown Medical, Morristown Hospital, and the Morris County Correctional Facility, where he said he didn't remember. Did you take into account those specific medical reports and references with regards to your determination as to whether or not Michael Barisone was feigning?
Well, feigning is determined by testing. It's not determined by just your subtle opinion. If I found no evidence of feigning, either personality or cognitive or neuropsychological with him, with the exception of the Tom, that's questionable results there anyway. So to answer you directly, I found no evidence of feigning. There was repeated references that he couldn't remember the event.
And in addition to your testing, do those references close in time to the incident confirm whether or not that testing is accurate?
I don't know about that. I mean, to me, consistently he reported he couldn't remember, he was dazed. There were statements that he had partial consciousness, and that's consistent with the possibility of a mild TBI or some type of extreme anxiety that obliterated that memory.
Now, with regards to his statement testified to where he allegedly said, "I'm sorry," in the hospital, were you aware that prior to that he was injected with 100 milligrams of fentanyl?
Yes.
And what, if anything, would that drug fentanyl have to do with?
Yeah, I don't know that he's qualified to say that. He's not a medical doctor.
Are you familiar with the effects of fentanyl, Doctor?
Same objection.
Yeah. If you're going to pursue this, I need to have a 104 hearing outside the presence of the jury.
I'll move on, Judge.
All right. Questions withdrawn.
Yesterday, the prosecutor was asking you questions as to whether or not someone's mistaken belief would affect your delusional diagnosis. Did you review the Safe Sport complaint that Lauren Cantarac made against Michael Barisone?
Yes.
Were there allegations of
Judge, I'm
sexual
going to object.
misconduct?
Hold on. There's an objection, Mr.
I
Belinkus.
didn't finish the question.
I know, and there's an objection. It doesn't mean you keep talking when there's an objection. Say the same thing to witnesses. Sustained.
Prosecutor asked you questions about the 911 calls.
Yes.
With regards to questions that were repeatedly asked with regards to those specific instances, did the questions concerning weapons have to do with
Judge,
those?
this is going to call for speculation.
How does this witness possibly know that?
If he heard the 911 calls, he would have.
And you're asking him to interpret the questions and what was asked by the police officer and what the police officer was asking? You can't answer that question.
No further questions, Judge.
You have any follow-up?
No, thank you.
All right, you may step down, Doctor. Thank you. Any further witnesses, Mr. Balinkas?
No, Judge, other than admitting numerous photographs, which I don't believe the prosecutor has any objections to.
All right, we don't have to do that now. We can do it at a break or at the close of business. We'll get on with the witnesses. So no further witnesses other than the admission of some photographs and defense rest. Mr. Shellhorn, does the state have any rebuttal witnesses?
Yes, Judge.
All right, call your first rebuttal witness.
Judge, this,
Can I have Dr. Hassan back in the courtroom?
Yes, you can listen.
Judge, the state will call Dr. Louis Schlesinger.
All right, Dr. Schlesinger. Doctor, good afternoon. All right, left hand on a, you know the routine. Left hand on a Bible, raise your right hand. Please listen to my court clerk.
Do you swear in the presence of Almighty God that the testimony given to this court regarding this matter shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please state your name and spell your last name for the record.
Louis, L-O-U-I-S, Schlesinger, S-C-H-L-E-S-I-N-G-E-R.
Thank you.
All right, you may have a seat, Doctor. Please keep your voice up nice and loud. If you don't understand a question, please indicate that. I'll have counsel rephrase. Go ahead, prosecutor.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Doctor.
Morning, counsel.
Can you please introduce yourself to the jury and tell them what you do for a living?
Well, Louis Schlesinger, I'm a forensic psychologist.
What is forensic psychology?
It's simply the application of behavioral science to the law. It's as simple as that.
Are you licensed as a psychologist?
Yes,
Can you tell the jury about that?
I'm a licensed psychologist
How long have you been licensed?
since 1976.
Are you board certified?
Yes.
Can you tell the jury about that?
I'm board certified as a forensic psychologist from the American Board of Professional Psychology. I've been board certified for well over 30 years.
So there is board certification in the field of psychology.
Definitely.
Can you tell the jury a little bit about your educational background?
Sure. I received my doctorate, my PhD in 1975 from the New School for Social Research in New York City. I was a trainee at Greystone Psychiatric Hospital from 71 to 73. I did my internship with the New Jersey Clinical Internship Program in psychology from 73 to 74, where I trained at the New Jersey State Diagnostic Center. That was the state's forensic center at that time. I did another rotation at Trenton State Prison, and then Trenton Psychiatric Hospital, the Vroom Building Readjustment Unit. Today it's Ann Klein Forensic Center, but it used to be called the Vroom Building. I did some postgraduate training at the New York Center for Psychoanalytic Training from 76 to 78, where I took courses in psychoanalytic theory and therapy. and I had postdoctoral individual supervision from 75 to 77, which is required. I'm licensed, board certified. I am a tenured full professor at John Jay College of Criminal Justice in New York, which is part of the City University of New York. And I've been there since 1997.
Can you tell us a little more about that, about your teaching experience there, Doctor?
John Jay College is the criminal justice school for the City University of New York. City University of New York is a mass university. Baruch College is the business school. City College is the liberal arts. And John Jay is really the criminal justice school. I teach undergraduates, master's students, and doctoral students as well. I teach forensic psychology. I'm a full professor of forensic psychology.
And I was just going to ask you that. What type of courses do you teach?
Well, I teach psychopathology, forensic psychology, crime scene analysis, and homicide. I teach a specific course in homicide as well.
Can you tell the jury a little bit about some of the professional activities that you're involved in?
Well, professional activities, well, I've had a lot of clinical experience, but other than my clinical experience, I was elected president of the New Jersey Psychological Association in 1989. Prior to that, I was vice president on the executive board. I was also a member and later chair of the State Ethics Committee from 1982 to 1988. I was also a member of the Forensic Psychology Committee from 1980 to the present. I was president of the New Jersey Psychology Political Action Committee from 91 to 93. I was a member of the Board of Trustees of the New Jersey Psychological Foundation from 96 to 98. I was president of the Society of Psychologists in Private Practice from 2001 to 2002. I've been on the executive board of the Essex Union County Association of Psychologists from 2007 to 2008. I was elected member of the Council of Representatives of the American Psychological Association. I did that from 91 to 94. The American Psychological the Council of Representatives of the American Psychological Association is really like their executive committee. And so I did that for several years. I was also treasurer of a division of group psychotherapy and editor of that group psychotherapy bulletin. I was an advisory board member from 83 to 88 of the American College of Forensic Psychology. I was a member of the Board of Trustees of the New Jersey Academy of Psychology. From 1980 to 1987, I was a member and later chair of the Special Classification Review Board at the Adult Diagnostic and Treatment Center at Avenel. I was appointed by the Governor of New Jersey and the Commissioner of Corrections. That's the board that evaluates inmates at the ADTC, Sex Offender Unit, and makes recommendations to the parole board for their release. I have been an associate editor of the International Journal of Offender Therapy and Comparative Criminology from 2005, and on the editorial board of the Journal of Threat Assessment from 1999 to 2003.
Doctor, can I just interrupt you on that? When
Sure.
you say that you're the editor of something like that, what does that mean?
I was associate editor, not the editor. I was an associate editor.
What's the difference?
Well, the editor is in charge of the journal. The editor has an editorial board, and they review papers that are presented for publication. That's basically what you do. They're not, a journal is not limited to the editorial board. Very often they'll send it out to external reviewers as well. Since 2000, I've been co-principal investigator on a major research project with the FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit down in Quantico, where we have thousands of extraordinary crimes, files we got from the FBI, and we have a major research project where we study extraordinary crime. Sexual murder, serial rape, suicide by cop, bias homicide, domestic homicide, and other forms of serious crime, which resulted in some major publications as well. In 2004, myself and 4 of my colleagues at John Jay conducted the research on sexual abuse in the Catholic Church by priests and deacons. from 1950 to 2002. The it was under the auspices of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops reached out to John Jay to do this for a couple of reasons, but one is because we had the FBI project, it was going so well. Let me say one thing. The FBI is a very paranoid organization. They do not like to share their information with others. So, but they did with us in terms of all their files. We have a room almost the size of this, just filled with files. There was no problem at all in terms of confidentiality or anything like that. So the head of the FBI at that time, the deputy head, left and was hired by the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops to conduct this study. And because of the very good experience that we had with the FBI, that's how John Jay was selected to do it. So we did that, and we presented our results to the bishops. I have also been a member of the Senate Task Force on Internet Information for Registered Sex Offenders. I was appointed by the acting governor and the Senate president. What happened was New Jersey needed to redo Megan's Law. That's the community notification of registered sex offenders. But before they did that, they put together a task force. I was on it representing mental health. There was someone from the prosecutor's office, the defense bar, Senator Anverso was on it. It was Megan Kanka's senator. Joe Vitale, who was a senator as well, was on it. There was someone else on it. Someone from Rutgers was on it as well, I think. And we basically rewrote the law, and we held public hearings and so on. And there was a number of reasons why that had to be done, but it's not relevant to anything else. I've been on the Research Advisory Board of the FBI, then specifically the National Center for the Analysis of Violent Crime at the Behavioral Analysis Unit from 2010 to 2012. And I've been a periodic instructor at the FBI since 2008, although I haven't been there in a while. We're all shut down and so on. And I've had a lot of different jobs over the years. Clinical
I was just going to ask you if you could tell the jury about some of your clinical experience.
Clinical experience, right. So in addition to being a tenured professor, I've also had a private practice of clinical and forensic psychology since 1976. I was a consultant at Fair Oaks Hospital, or now it's called Summit Hospital, from 76 to 2000, where I worked with adults and adolescents, and almost exclusively psychological evaluations, very limited therapy, only early on. I've been a consultant at Little Hill Alena Lodge in Blairstown, New Jersey, from 1998 to the present. That's a substance abuse unit, a long-term treatment program for substance abuse. I was also on the staff of the VA Medical Center in East Orange from 1976 to 1999. And there I worked on their alcohol and substance abuse program. I worked on their compensation and pension program. That's where veterans get evaluated for PTSD and that type of thing. But I also founded a violence clinic in the VA, which the purpose of the clinic was to evaluate people with respect to a problem with violence, and then we treated them. And it was the first violence clinic in the entire VA system, and it became brought into the PTSD program when the PTSD program started, and so on. And I coordinated that from 77 to 92. Prior to that, I was on the staff of JFK Medical Center in Edison. I worked in their mental health center, and I also worked at their rehab unit as well. And I was a consultant to the Edison Police Department, the Juvenile Aid Bureau, from 75 to 76.
Doctor, have you ever received any awards in recognition of things you've done?
Yes.
Can you tell the jury about some of those awards?
Yes. In 1990, I was awarded Psychologist of the Year by the New Jersey Psychological Association. In 1993, I received the Carl F. Heiser Presidential Award from the American Psychological Association. In 2003, I received the Distinguished Service Award from the Society of Psychologists in Private Practice. From 2005 to present, to the present, I've been a distinguished practitioner in the National Academies of Practice. The National Academies of Practice is based up of 9 medical specialists, including psychologists, and each specialty is limited to 100 people in that specialty. And the purpose is to advise the United States Congress on matters of health care. And so I've been on that. And in 2014, I received the Distinguished Researcher Award from the New Jersey Psychological Association.
I was just going to ask you about some of your professional organizations that you're a member of.
Yeah. I'm a fellow of the American Psychological Association. A fellow is a little bit different than being a member. I was a member for many years, but when the American Psychological Association determines that your work, your contribution had national impact, they can elect you to be a fellow. It can't be local or state. They have to determine that it was national impact. So I'm a fellow of the APA. I've been a fellow of the New Jersey Psychological Association. I said I was president of that a while back. I'm also a member of the American Academy of Forensic Psychology. I'm actually a fellow of the American Academy of Forensic Psychology. It's not on my CV, but I am. A member of the Essex Union County Association of Psychologists, the Society for Personality Assessment, and also a member of the International Rorschach Exchange. And
What's that?
it's just a scientific group that sends out once or twice a year a book called Rorschach, and it's just research, and people write things about their research on the Rorschach.
Have you ever published anything related to the field of psychology?
Yes.
Can you tell the jury, have you ever published any books?
I've had 12 books published. In 1978, I published Violence, Perspectives on Murder and Aggression. In 1980, I published Handbook on Stress and Anxiety. In 1981, Psychopathology of Homicide. In 1983, the title of the book was Sexual Dynamics of Antisocial Behavior, and there was a second edition in 1997. In 1989, I published Sex, Murder, and Sex Aggression. In 1996, I published Explorations in Criminal Psychopathology, Clinical Syndromes with Forensic Implications, and there was a second edition in 2007. The reason I published that was clinical syndromes with forensic implications, because the DSM often doesn't do well with a lot of disorders that are forensically related, because the DSM really wasn't set up to be a forensic manual. It's set up for hospital practice, mental health centers, offices, and so on. So that book supplemented it in a sense.
So what you mean is there nuance to applying diagnoses from the DSM in a forensic setting?
Well, not nuance. There's disorders that are that you see.
Are we still doing qualifications at this point? Because
I think we are. Are we, Mr. Shuttleworth?
We are.
All right, save that question for later.
I
then.
will, Judge.
All right.
So moving on, you were telling us about some of your books, Doctor.
Yeah, and then 2000, I published Serial Offenders, Current Thought, Recent Findings. In 2004, Sexual Murder, Catathymic, and Compulsive Homicides, a specific type of sexual murder. And the second edition came out last year. In 2017, I published a book titled Psychiatric Aspects of Criminal Behavior. It's the collected papers of Eugene Revich. This is an edited book. Eugene Revich was a psychiatrist and a teacher of mine, and he actually became a mentor of mine, and we became colleagues and friends. And his papers, many of which were published in the 1950s and 60s and 70s, are as relevant today as they were then. And they meant so much to me when I trained. I almost memorized them. And I didn't want them to get lost in the archives somewhere. So I put it together into an edited book where the first part is on sexual aggression, the second part on criminal behavior, and the third part of the book is on epilepsy and epileptoid violence. Dr. Revich is also a neurologist, and there's a number of articles in there on what's called paroxysmal manifestations of non-epileptic origin. Sounds fancy, but all it means is an explosion that's really not a result of epilepsy. Sometimes that's hard to differentiate. So So that's that book. It was a book of honor, really, to somebody, and got really, really good reviews, which I was happy about. But I had nothing to do with the content, I just put it together.
Doctor, have you ever written any chapters in any books?
Yes, I've written, I think, about 25 chapters in different people's books. I've been invited to write chapters, and so I think it's around 25 chapters in different books. Some were my own books, many were other people's books as well.
Have you ever published articles in any journals?
Yes, I've published about, I believe it's 43 articles in peer-reviewed scientific journals.
What's a peer-reviewed scientific journal?
A peer-reviewed scientific journal is when you publish an article, research, or it doesn't have to necessarily be research, it could be a theoretical article or a literature review. You send it into a journal, and then you get what's called a blind review. Your identity is removed, all identifiers are removed, and they send it out to 3, 4, or 5 experts in the field to review it, your peers. And then they give feedback, and then you do what you have to do. And so that's what the peer review process is. It's a fairly long process, and in many top journals, there's about a 90% rejection rate. So a lot of people don't realize that. But I've published in all of the top journals, including the American Academy, the Journal of the American Academy of Forensic Psychiatry, Behavioral Science in the Law, Journal of Forensic Sciences, Journal of Family Violence, International Journal of Offender Therapy and Comparative Criminology, and other top journals. And a lot of it is on it's almost all on criminal behavior and extraordinary criminal behavior, sexual murder, serial sexual murder, necrophilia, crime scene staging, undoing, which is symbolic reversal at a homicide crime scene, foreign object insertions, and so on. We recently published, and a lot of this was in collaboration with the FBI, because we have their extraordinary cases from all over the country. And recently we published an article on confessions. You hear a lot about false confession. There's a lot of research on false confession, but our study was not on false confession, it was on confessions. How do people confess? Because people confess in different ways depending upon their crime.
Doctor, have you ever testified at a trial?
Yes.
What can you estimate approximately how many times you've testified at a trial?
I never kept a record of how many times I've done this, and I'm not good at estimating how many times I've done things, but I've been doing this now 46 years, 100, 200, perhaps 300 times. I just don't know.
And were you qualified as an expert?
Yes.
What are some of the topics that you've testified regarding?
I mean, I've testified in state of mind cases, insanity, diminished capacity, passionate provocation, duress, voluntary intoxication, competency to proceed, competency to waive Miranda rights, sentencing issues.
Have you ever been hired? Obviously, you're here testifying as my witness on behalf of the prosecutor today. Have you ever been hired by the defense?
I have. In the first third of my career, I've testified just about exclusively for the defense. I was hired mostly by the defense. In the last third of my career, I've been retained mostly by the prosecutor. And in the middle, it kind of went in different ways.
Have you ever given an opinion that was different from the party or the side that hired you?
Yes.
Can you estimate in the last, call it 10 years, approximately how many times that's happened?
Well, I can tell you the exact time in the past 10 or a little bit longer, 10, maybe almost 15 years, because I have a record of it. And the reason I have a record of it is someone asked me just that question maybe 10, 12 years ago. And they asked me, essentially, did you ever get hired by the prosecutor, for example, and gave an opinion consistent with the defense expert? And I said yes. Now, when you're in court and someone asks you if you ever did something and you say yes, the next question is, how many times did you do it? And I didn't know how many times I did it. So I kept a record then of the times of the various offices that I was retained by, as well as defense.
And so what is the number in the approximately last 10 to 15 years that you've given an opinion different from the party that hired you?
Okay, now you want a number, so I'm going to have to count this. So Just give me a second.
Okay.
Okay, just give me a second. Okay, I came up with 30. 30, yeah, 30,
Since you started keeping track.
yeah.
Doctor, do you have any experience with psychological testing?
Yes, I have extensive experience with psychological testing. Psychological testing is very simple. It's simply a way to measure mental process. It's really nothing more difficult and more complicated than that. And it's generally pretty straightforward psychological testing, but I will say if you don't know what you're doing, you can really mess this up real quickly.
Do you have any, I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say, I taught psychological testing for over 20 years. When I was on the faculty of the New Jersey Medical School, I was on the faculty over there, I don't know if I even mentioned that, but I was on the faculty over there at UMD&J from 77 to 99, I think, or 2000. For 23 years, I taught psychological testing to third-year medical students who rotated through psychiatry service. I also conducted a year-long psychodiagnostic seminar for our doctoral interns who were training over at the VA, and did that for over 20 years as well. In addition, I've published 2 papers on the Rorschach in journals. I also developed my own projective test entitled the Criminal Fantasy Test, and it was really based on, as a projective test, and based on the format of the thematic apperception test, which is simply a test. You show a person a somewhat ambiguous picture, and their job is to create a story based on the picture, and you get kind of their inner fantasies, their inner thoughts, and so on, because sometimes an individual, patient or otherwise, if you ask them a question, they won't tell you directly. But if you give them a test and ask them to create a story, very often it's revealed in that. So I was always impressed with the content that I got from the TAT. So I worked with an artist, a colleague of mine worked with an artist, and we developed a criminal fantasy test of 12 different ambiguous sorts of crimes, and the object was to create a story about it. It was published in 1981 in the Journal of Clinical Psychology. At that time, a number of test publishers wanted me to develop this into a marketable test where you could, sell it and that sort of thing. And I did not do it. I should have done it. It's one of my greatest professional regrets because I think of all of the people that I saw over the past 40 years. But I didn't do it. But anyway, I did that. Also, I discuss psychological testing in several of my books, or many of my books, and how to do it, what to do, what not to do, and how to go about it, and so on.
Would you ever render a diagnosis based on a psychological test?
No, you never render a diagnosis based on a psychological test. Psychological testing can support a diagnosis. A diagnosis is made clinically, and it's made based on the clinical criteria, symptoms and behaviors delineated in the DSM-5. Now, the DSM-5, this is a Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. It's been around since 1952. It goes through different editions. That's how you make a diagnosis, based on symptoms and behavior. Now, what's the value of testing? Well, testing can support a diagnosis or it can go in a different direction and not support a diagnosis. But you never make a diagnosis based on psychological testing. As a matter of fact, if you look at some of the tests that have computer printouts, I don't use those, but a lot of people do, it says very clearly, these are hypotheses, these are suggestions, these are for your consideration. But no, the answer to your question directly, you never make a diagnosis based on psychological testing.
Judge, at this point, I'd like to offer Dr. Schlesinger as an expert in the field of forensic psychology.
Mr. Belinkus, do you have any questions as to the qualifications of the doctor or any opposition?
No, Judge.
All right. All right, based on the background of Dr. Schlesinger, as outlined in his testimony, I do find pursuant to Rule 702 of the New Jersey Rules of Evidence that he qualifies as an expert, and he may, in forensic psychology, and may testify in the form of opinion. I make this determination based on his education, his knowledge, skill, experience, and training, and extensive work history. All right, very good. He'll qualify as an expert. Go ahead, Mr. Shellhorn.
Doctor, is there any difference between a psychologist and a psychiatrist in a forensic setting?
Yes, there is a difference. There's a difference in training. A psychiatrist after college goes to medical school and studies medicine, and then he or she does a 4-year residency in psychiatry, where they study, diagnosis, DSM, and usually treatment with medication. Not all the time, but usually treatment with medication and some psychotherapy. A psychologist after college goes to graduate school for 4, 5, 6 years, depending upon their program and how they get through it, and gets training in behavioral science and psychopathology, diagnosis, evaluation, and testing and treatment and so on. And then a psychologist does a clinical internship, a pre-doctoral internship, and then he does at least a year of postdoctoral supervision or more. Psychologists and psychiatrists train together. I mean, I've been trained by psychiatrists. Dr. Revich was a mentor of mine, and he was he's a psychiatrist. He was my main teacher, and so I've been trained by psychiatrists. But I taught at the medical school for years. I taught undergraduates. That's medical students. They're called undergraduates in medicine for years. I taught interviewing with them, testing. I said with the 3rd-year residents, and with 3rd-year medical students, and with psychiatry residents, I supervised them with their experience at the substance abuse unit, and specifically with group therapy and evaluation with respect to substance abuse. In addition, psychologists and psychiatrists practice together all the time. I practiced for 25 years with a psychiatrist in Summit, Sergio Estrada. We each had our patients. He did medication. I did psychotherapy. I did evaluations for him. It's a great collaboration. So, I've worked with him and throughout, very, very collegially. And that's the difference, basically.
Doctor, in this case, were you asked to see and examine Michael Barisone?
Yes.
You see Mr. Barisone in court?
I think that's Michael sitting next to his attorney, although I will say he looks very different than when I saw him.
Can you describe what's different about him?
Well, when I saw him, he was well-groomed and looked appropriate, and now he looks long, disheveled hair. That's not how he looked when I saw him.
Do you recall approximately when you saw him?
I saw him exactly on January 29th, March 12th, and April 29th, 2021, last year.
And Doctor, are you referring to a copy of your report?
Yes.
Judge, I'm just going to indicate for the record that that was marked as S404 for purposes of the record.
All right, very good.
Doctor, when you were first asked to see and examine Michael Barisone, what did you do first?
Well, first I did psychological. Well, before I saw him, I familiarized myself with the discovery, and that's what you have to do. A forensic assessment has 3 parts. The facts of the case that you get from the discovery. The discovery is the police reports and witness statements and all the rest. The second part of a forensic assessment is the psychopathology. Is there a disorder? What's the disorder? And so on. And the third part is that the jury will take the facts and the disorder, psychopathology, and relate it to a legal standard, whatever that is.
Now, in this case, you indicated that you did review discovery and that that's an important part of the process. Do you recall what discovery you reviewed?
I reviewed the complete state's case, everything. There was thousands and thousands of pages of text messages and everything. And there were videos, recorded statements and so on.
I was just going to ask you, did you watch or listen to any of the recorded witness statements?
Yes, some were video statements, some were just audio, but I listened to everyone, yes.
Why would you listen to the statements or watch the statements as opposed to relying on a summary or a report?
Well, you could read the summary of the report too. A lot of the statements are summarized in the police report, but that's not the way to do it. You want to see, that's some person saying what they found to be significant in it. You are obligated to look at it yourself and make your own determination and get a look at what the person said in whole, not just a summary of what the person said.
Did you also review any reports that were authored by any psychiatrists hired by the defendant?
Yes,
And that was Dr. Simmering?
Dr. Simmering.
Do you know Dr. Simmering?
I know Dr. Simmering very well. I've known Dr. Simmering for over 30 years. I have the highest regard for Dr. Simmering. He's a friend of mine. Dr. Simmering is competent, he's experienced, he's intelligent, he's funny, and he's an extremely nice guy, which I think I said to you at least 50 times. And I've worked with Dr. Simmering on cases. I've worked opposite Dr. Simmering on cases. I referred cases to Dr. Simmering. He's referred cases to me. I have the highest regard for Dr. Simmering. But I disagree with him in this case, but that has nothing to do with my high regard for Dr. Simmering.
Have you agreed with him in certain cases?
Yes. Okay.
And have you disagreed with him in certain cases?
Yes.
Do you know how much time you spent with Michael Barisone in this case?
Yes, I spent 13.25 hours, 13 and a quarter hours.
And I think I meant to ask you, and I'm not sure if I did, were you aware of Dr. Simmering's diagnoses in this case?
Yes,
And that's why you said you disagree with him in this case?
correct.
Now, you indicated that you met with Michael Barisone and that he looked different when you met him.
Yes.
What was his demeanor when you met with him?
Well, when I first met with him, he was very, very tearful. I mean, he was crying uncontrollably. He almost at times was hard to console him. He was very upset about the whole thing. And if I could just refer to my report, he was tearful, emotional, crying. He became animated at times, particularly when discussing Lauren and Robert Goodwin and the whole circumstances with respect to that. He would stand up, get animated, and so on. He was very emotional about it, and he did that. But he after he calmed down and he participated fine. He was cooperative completely, answered my questions, except for some resistance towards the end.
Now, how would you describe his ability to recount certain things that happened?
Michael's memory as to what happened was excellent. I spent hours with him, I think it's over 6 hours, talking about what had happened. He gave me a day-by-day account of the activities that happened. Sometimes it was an hour-by-hour account. Now, occasionally he would say, well, on July 24th, I woke up and I did this. Oh, by the way, there's something happened on July 23rd, and then he would go back to that. But that's normal. That's how people remember things and recall things. But he remembered in great detail everything. I was very impressed by his memory.
How would you describe his concentration during the times that you met with him?
When I was with him, his concentration was basically okay. I was with him for hours and hours at a time. Now, he was emotional. He was crying and so on. But he was okay. His concentration was basically okay.
What would you say was the most outstanding clinical feature that you observed?
I was just crying and his being so upset about the whole thing. He's extremely emotional and animated. That was the most outstanding feature. Other than that, no, he was pleasant. He was pleasant to deal with, pleasant to talk to. He was very appropriate and nothing bizarre or unusual in his demeanor other than what I just said or what he said.
Now, you described in general what a forensic evaluation or examination entails. How do you look at criminal behavior?
Criminal behavior is best understood in 3 stages. The pre-crime context. Criminal behavior doesn't come out of nowhere. There's a context to understand it. then there's the actual offense itself, and then there's the post-crime behavior. And that's really the best way to understand, from my perspective, from a psychological perspective, criminal behavior.
And how do you learn that?
Well, you learn that from the discovery. You don't learn that from what the defendant tells you. You learn that from the discovery. I should say, I should correct myself, a very nuanced thing that I just want to say a little bit different. Yes, he told me what happened on a day-by-day, hour-by-hour, sometime basis, but I want to emphasize that's his perception of what happened. I don't know if everything he told me is exactly correct, but that's what his perception was of it. But, yes.
And I think you described earlier, Doctor, you started to talk about the way memory works. And can you explain a little bit more about that in light of your last answer?
Well, memory is not, there's no video camera inside here that makes a videotape of what goes on. Memory is a constructive process. We construct our memory. If somebody asks you, what did you have for breakfast yesterday? You'll probably give them an answer, but it's constructed. It's not that you necessarily have an exact memory of it. It's, you have breakfast all the time, what you think, and then you construct memory. That's the way human memory works. And you have, you can have an event. I mean, you see this in legal practice all the time, not necessarily criminal, say an accident. 3 people look at an accident and 3 people give statements. Are those 3 statements going to be exact? No, they're not going to be exact. That's how they perceive it. People perceive things differently based on many factors.
And if people perceive things differently, does that mean that one or more of them is having a delusion?
Absolutely not.
Doctor, you indicated that you, as part of your examination, gave the defendant some psychological tests.
Yes.
And I think you outlined those beginning on page 50 in your report.
Okay, just give me a second, please. Yes.
But before we get there, can I ask you, how do you choose what tests you're going to use in a forensic examination?
Yeah. I give psychological testing to I won't say every single person, but I would say 99.99% of the people I give a standard battery of psychological testing to. I give the Rorschach, the thematic apperception test, the Bender Gestalt, projective figure drawings, the MMPI 2, and a version of the Wechsler scales. That's an intelligence test. If the case requires, I'll add additional tests. Tests for malingering mental disorders, for example. Tests for malingering memory, for example. And other types of tests as well. But I give that standard battery to everybody. Why? I just want to get a measure. I want to get a baseline measure of the individual. And when I start my evaluation in a forensic case, I start with psychological testing. I don't start with what did you do? What happened? No, I start with that because it's sort of a breaks the ice, and some simple tests, and it's a rapport builder, and this type of thing. So that's what I do.
Now, in this case, did you give the defendant any tests related to intellectual examination?
Yes.
What did you give him?
I gave the Wechsler Abbreviated Scale of Intelligence. The Wechsler Abbreviated Scale of Intelligence is an abbreviated intelligence test that has a 0.93 correlation with the complete Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale revised. It means you're tapping essentially the same thing. Now, why did I give him the abbreviated test rather than the full Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale? Very simple. Intelligence is not an issue in the case, meaning intelligence is not an issue before the court. If intelligence was an issue before the court, for example, the issue is competency to stand trial based on limited intelligence, not necessarily intellectual disability, borderline intelligence, so on, then you're obliged to give the full test. If it was competency to waive your Miranda rights based on intelligence, if it's a Social Security disability evaluation, for example, and intelligence is an issue, then yes. But in this particular case, Michael is an highly intelligent individual. He ran a very complicated business. He had with lots of moving parts. He had a location in New Jersey, he had a location in Florida. There was a lot of people that were employees. There were students and trainees there. There were animals there, horses. There was all kinds of consultants coming in, horseshoe people and veterinarians and whatnot. He said these monthly expenses like $36,000 a month. That's a lot of money. That's a very big and complicated business. He's highly intelligent. Intelligence is not an issue in this case. Prior to seeing him, I also read Dr. Simring's report, who described him as highly intelligent. And I gave some weight to that as well. So there's no need, in my judgment, to do anything beyond what I did.
Now, after giving him that test, did that corroborate what your impression was going in?
Yes, let me refer to my report on page 50. I found his full-scale IQ, it's his intelligence quotient, 119. That's the highest end of average, just 1 point below superior. His verbal comprehension index is 120, that's superior. And his perceptual reasoning index is 112. This is all above average intelligence. There's nothing wrong with Michael's intelligence, nothing. He's an intelligent individual.
Did you give him any tests related to personality functioning?
Yes.
Can you, and I know you had already said you give a standard battery of tests. What in general are the personality functioning tests looking for or looking at?
Well, generally you're looking at personality from different perspectives, from different ways. I gave him the Rorschach, I gave him the thematic apperception test, the MMPI 2, and projective figure drawings. And there's a combination here of projective tests and combination and the MMPI, which is a more objective, let's say, quantitative test as well.
And I know you said you give some of these tests to establish a baseline, but what specifically do you hope to learn by giving these tests that would have value to your entire examination?
Sure. Well, the Rorschach, for example, has been around since the 1920s. This is an excellent test if used properly. It's a very good test to determine reality contact, reality testing. For example, you show a card, and some of these cards look like bat and butterflies. I mean, that's, everybody kind of, I think, knows that from the media and whatnot. So a person says to you, it looks like a bat, a butterfly, or some sort of winged creature. That's pretty good reality testing. What if a person says to you, it looks like an enemy? Well, that's not typical, and that gives you some insight into that. It's very good to determine if there's a thinking disorder, a formal thought disorder. Does the person say, for example, it looks like a bat because here's the wings, here's the body, here's the antenna, here's the feet? That's very logical thinking. What if a person says to you, it looks like a bat because of that white dot right in the middle? Bats have white dots. That's showing a disorder of thought. They're drawing a giant conclusion based on a tiny bit of information. That's a red sign. What if a person says, it looks like a bat? Response 1. It looks like 2 alligators over here on the end. Response 2. That's fine. What if a person says, it looks like a bat with alligators attached to its wings? Now that's a thinking disorder. That's a problem with thinking. You're putting parts of reality together that should be kept separate. And so those are some of the things you get from the Rorschach. The Rorschach is also very good to give you personality structure. How strong or weak is the underlying personality structure? For example, when you go to buy a house, you hire a structural engineer, not just to look at what the painting is outside, but to go take those tiles off with a flashlight to see what the structure is, to see how strong the house is. The Rorschach is a very good test to determine whether the structure is the level of a personality disorder, more severe structural disorganization, schizophrenia, or something like that. So it's a very good test if used properly.
Now, before I ask you about the Rorschach in this specific case, I wanted to ask you a little bit about the Rorschach itself. Are there more than one testing or scoring system?
Yes, there's been a number of scoring systems used over the years. Rorschach himself, it's Rorschach because that's his name, Herman Rorschach. He had his own system. Another guy named Samuel Beck had a system. Bruno Klopfer had a system. Zygmunt Piotrowski had a system. There's a whole bunch of these systems. I trained on the Beck system, but I switched to Klopfer because it's much better clinically. I think it's actually the best. What happened in the mid-1970s to the 1980s, a guy named John Exner came around, and created his own system. He called it the comprehensive system. Why? He said, well, all these systems are good. I'm going to put it all together, and I'm going to make it in a very quantitative fashion, which sounded good, and everybody was interested in that. Now, I had training on the Exner system from John Exner. How? Because back in, I can't remember if it was 79, 80, or 81, when I was at the VA, John Exner came there. He was promoting his system all around the country, and he's a good marketer. He really, really is good. And he gave a series of lectures, maybe, I don't think it was more than five 2-hour lectures, to go over his system. But I never liked it. Now, why didn't I like it? Not because I'm so smart, because I'm not. But what he was doing is he was making the Rorschach, which is a projective test, something that it's not. It was never really intended to be that. But, okay, he wanted to do it in a quantitative way. The system really became very, very popular throughout the world, particularly in the 1980s and the 1990s, and schools were teaching this, and workshops are given all over the world, and computer printouts and books and all the rest of it. The problem began in the mid-1990s where it was determined that there was a lot of problems with the test in terms of its validity. Now, I should say this also. Exner put together what he called the Exner Research Council. The members of the Research Council still are, they're all alive, top-notch people who did research and promoted this and did workshops and so on. Greg Meyer is one, Joni Mahura is another one, Don Viglione is another one, Phil Erdberg is the fourth. There's one other person I can't remember. And these are top-notch people. And when they started hearing this, that there's problems with the system, they thought initially, maybe this is one-off, and then more problems came. And then by around 2000, it just became untenable. And John Exner died, I think it was 2006, it was about 15 years ago. And I asked, one of the people on the Exner Research Council is a good friend of mine, Phil Erdberg. So I asked him, did you wait for Exner to die before you completely, and they laughed. I never got an answer, but I think I know the answer. Anyway, they decided, they did research on their own, and they said, this can't go on. And they published a meta-analysis, a META. A meta-analysis is an analysis of analyses. And they published it in a prestigious journal called Psychological Bulletin. And a couple of other journals as well that really talked about the problems in the journal. That it's just, and the problems were two. There's problems with the normative data and the validity data. The normative data means how the test was normed by Exner. He didn't collect information and send it out for the peer review process. He didn't do that. He collected information and put it in his book and said, these are the norms. Well, that's a problem. And the validity data as well. Now, I gave you a number of articles on that. Now, I didn't follow all of the details of the problems with the Exner system because I don't use it. I knew that there was a problem with it because Phil Erdberg's a friend of mine. We discussed it and so on. And to be very direct, a lot of people that promoted this were quite embarrassed when this started happening because don't forget, they were spending years of their professional career teaching this, promoting it, and so on. And so what the Exner Research Council did after they published a series of articles concluding that it's not a valid system of scoring and you shouldn't use it. Now, I want to make something clear. This is not my opinion. This is not an opinion. This is a conclusion reached by the Exner Research Council, those individuals closely connected with Exner and the system. They decided to put together, and they were committed to a quantitative approach to Rorschach, and they put together a new system. They tried to redo it. They thought first, maybe we could redo it, cut this. They said it was just not salvageable. And so they put together a new system called the Rorschach Performance Assessment System. And I think I gave you a manual. And all the people listed there are all the people on the Exner Rorschach Council.
Do you have another question?
Yes, Judge.
All right, we're getting a little too narrative here.
Well, I had asked him about the different
I know.
scoring systems and about the Exner system. We heard a lot about that yesterday.
Well, no,
but
I
we can certainly
understand.
move on at this
Yeah,
point.
just ask another question to follow up if you need to.
Doctor, at some point, were you made aware that another doctor named Dr. Charles Hassan had examined the defendant in this case.
Yes,
And were you provided with a copy of his report?
yes.
Are you aware whether or not he administered the Rorschach test to Michael Barisone?
Yes, he did. No, he didn't. Oh, wait, just give me a second.
I see
Give me
you're a
one
little
second.
bit distracted. I'll wait until.
Yeah. No, he did not administer the Rorschach to him. He used my Rorschach findings and said he rescored it using the Exner system. And he submitted it to the Exner computer program, which is still there. I should say, you can still get this, obviously. It's run now by Exner's daughter. She's not a psychologist, and she works with a psychologist in France, Europe, and I think it's France, and Japan. And so you can still get this. So yes, I'm aware of that. He didn't administer it to him, he rescored it using the Exner system.
Now, you said that you used the Klopper system.
Correct.
What were your results after scoring Michael Barisone's Rorschach with the Klopper test?
Well, again, it's not just the, see, that's another problem. That's not just the scoring system. I heard so much, about scoring systems. The Rorschach is not just wedded to a scoring system. It's how I explained it before. So my findings from the Rorschach, I found that there was inner anxiety, conflict and tension, problems relaxing. There were a number of what's called achromatic perceptions. There was attention to the, it looks like a bat because it's black, using the black color, which is a marker for depression or depressive vulnerability. So he has symptoms, depression, anxiety. He's not withdrawn from the outside world. His inner life is dominated somewhat by impulsive tendencies, and there's some form of acting out likely there. His responses that he gave were well connected to the stimulus material. His reality testing was completely intact. There's no evidence of a formal thought disorder. His thinking was clear and logical. There's nothing suggestive of schizophrenia, psychosis, or even borderline traits. He gave 2 slightly regressive perceptions, and that's thing like throwing paint, fireworks, that type of thing. And it's very, very consistent with you find in individuals who have a personality disorder. And those were the responses. In my report, I concluded exactly on page 52 what his responses were. They're logical, well-formed, well-connected to the stimulus material upon which they were based, meaning the reality testing is good, and no structural disorganization. I also found there's a capacity for empathy. He had an adequate number of human perceptions, which means he has an ability to establish good interpersonal relationships with people.
Did you render any diagnoses based on the results of the Rorschach examination?
No, you never render a diagnosis on the basis of any test. A test can give you just what I said, all of these different indices, and that could support or not support a diagnosis. But a diagnosis, again, is never based on psychological testing.
Doctor, moving on to the MMPI. What, if you could explain that test in a general sense?
It's 3:10. I don't know if anyone else needs a break. I do. If you get my meaning. So we're just it's gonna be short because I know we're just sitting in the afternoon. So just 10 quick minutes. Relax for 10 minutes. Use the facilities if you have to do that, and we'll come back at 20 after and pick up. All right. Yeah. Very good. You can step down, Doctor. You can just step down.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. You can bring the witness in, officer, thank you. All right, be seated, ladies and gentlemen. We'll proceed with the direct examination. Go ahead, Mr. Shellhorn.
Thank you, Your Honor. Doctor, just to finish up on the point of the, I'm sorry. I heard my own voice there, Judge, and I think it's okay now.
Are we good, Ms. Radler? All right, very good. Please proceed, Mr. Shellhorn.
Doctor, just one final question on the Rorschach. You indicated that you had reviewed Dr. Hassan's rescoring with the Exner. What was your impression of that rescore?
Well, again, the test is, it's invalid without a doubt, but there's some interesting points here that seem to have been left out. For example, if you look at page 12 of 13, number 21, says here, this is from I'm reading it now. This person, meaning Michael, appears to be excessively committed to seeing the world accurately. He is consequently capable of perceiving people and events realistically, but he is also likely to be the highly precise impressions he forms of situations. Only rarely will he allow himself the risk of forming an impression that may be inexact. And then it goes down to number 24, which I thought was important. Generally speaking, he displays an adaptive capacity to think logically and coherently. He is capable, as most people, of coming to reasonable conclusions about relationships between events and maintaining a connected flow of associations which ideas follow each other in a comprehensible manner. I think that's important because that's the opposite of a psychosis. His thinking is clear and logical based on this. I don't know why that was left out. And then it goes on the next page, page 13 of 13. Going down the third paragraph, it would start situation-related stress, because he's consequently more vulnerable than most people, becoming acutely upset, anxious, even disorganized, and his situationally determined stress overload is also likely to impair his capacity for self-control and create a potential for impulsiveness in what he thinks and says or does. And then 2 paragraphs down, he displays an adaptive capacity to think logically and coherently. And the last sentence says, there's a connected flow of associations in which ideas follow each other in a comprehensive manner. This is all the opposite of a psychosis. Why isn't that in a report? Why wouldn't you put that in? Come on. So I thought that was noteworthy, and that's why I'm bringing it up.
And Doctor, is that the RIAP?
No, that's the Rorschach Interpretation Assistance Program. It's the Exner, what he got from the Exner.
Judge, just so the record's clear, that's marked as S435.
All right, I was going to ask you that question. S435, okay.
Doctor, moving on to the MMPI, could you generally explain what that test is and what you're looking for?
Sure. The MMPI, it's the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory. That test has been around since the 1940s from the University of Minnesota. That's why it's called Minnesota. Personality inventory, and multiphasic just means many different parts. The test has been around for years, and it has been restandardized in the early 90s by a guy named James Butcher. And James Butcher is from the University of Minnesota. So he's very knowledgeable on this test. He's really the person who did the restandardization. I've used the MMPI for years, and what I use is I use the 10 basic clinical scales, 1 through 10, and 10 validity scales. Now, here's how the test is set up. Before you interpret the profile, the test tells you how the subject was taking the test. Were they being overly defensive and denying problems that everybody has, such as never had a headache, never had a bad day. True. Well, that will elevate that validity profile. Are they over-endorsing items to make them appear more disturbed than they actually are? They have every symptom. Bugs crawling up my skin, hear voices, Martians control my brain, things like that. An over-endorsement of items. Or are they trying to respond to items in a socially appropriate fashion, showing high moral values and what's socially expected? For example, before I vote in an election, I thoroughly investigate the candidate's position on all of the issues. True. Well, very few people do that, but it's socially appropriate. So before you interpret the 10 clinical scales, you look to see how the person was going about taking the test. And then you look at the 10 clinical scales. Very important. Lecture number 1 in the MMPI, if you're teaching this, is the labels of the 10 clinical scales should never be taken literally. It was never meant to be that. So, for example, if a person has a high elevation on scale 4, the label is psychopathic deviant. That does not mean the person is a psychopath. It doesn't mean that. Scale 8 is labeled schizophrenia. If a person has a high elevation on scale 8, it doesn't mean the person is schizophrenic. It never meant that. Scale 6, for example, is labeled paranoia. If you have a high elevation on scale 6, that does not mean the person is paranoid. As a matter of fact, most, not all, but most flagrantly paranoid individuals don't score high on that at all. And if you look at Butcher's book, I showed the prosecutor, I don't know if that any of that came out, but anyway, he has a section that says the literal do not literally interpret these scale names. And the first sentence is, if you do, you're poorly trained. That's not me, that's Butcher saying that. So if you think a high elevation on scale 6 means you're paranoid, it means one thing according to Butcher, you're poorly trained. You don't understand what's going on. And if you read the description from Butcher on an elevation on scale 6, it's nothing about delusions and all the rest of it. So when I hear, for example, in Dr. Hassan's report, and I do not want to be disrespectful at all, and I'm trying my best not to be, and I don't want to be, but he said something to the effect, I don't know anybody that would look at this high scale 6 and interpret it anything different than paranoid psychosis. Really? I don't know anybody that would, including Butcher, who wrote the book on it. So it's just incorrect.
Now, when you gave this test to Michael Barisone, what were the results that you came up with?
Well, I gave the test, the validity, on page 53, if anybody's following this, the validity scales show a non-significant exaggeration of symptoms, so that's not a problem. There was a slight attempt to give socially approved answers concerning self-control and moral values, but it didn't invalidate the test. Sometimes the validity scales are high and it invalidates it. That is not the case here. I found mild depression, anxiety, suicide threats and attempts are possible, inner anger, irritability, suspiciousness. These are common symptoms, and individuals likely control their anger, but sometimes they episodically explode and surprise those around them. Now, how am I getting that? It's not just scale 6, but he had another scale elevation, without getting into the weeds, high scale 4, low scale 5. That's sometimes called a masculine protest, meaning individuals feel insecure and try to compensate for that by demonstrating that they're dominant in some way. Also, with the MMPI, what you do not do, or let me put it a better way, what you do is you have to look at what's called critical items. Critical items are what items is he responding to that's elevating the scale. This is common sense, and you really have to do it. Now, I'm looking at, this is Dr. Hassan's findings, and if you look at critical items, Let me show you, these are the items that elevated the scale that Michael responded to. Also, I should say this before I even get into this. It is not at all uncommon for criminal defendants pending a serious trial to have a high elevation on scale 6 because a lot of it is reality-based. People are persecuting them and out to get them and talking about them. So here's the items that Michael responded to.
Doctor, just before you judge this, I believe has been marked as S434 for identification.
All right, and what is that exactly? Those are scale scores?
No, this is, Judge, this is the MMPI 2 extended score report.
Okay.
Yeah.
And this is your understanding that Dr. Hassan had rescored your scores, or used your scores and rescored it on his own?
Oh, yes, but that's not the point I'm making now.
I just wanted to make the record clear.
Yeah, oh, okay,
Before you
right,
go on.
right.
Go ahead.
Okay. So if you look at the critical items, now I did this, and he did it too. How do I know? It's right here. I am sure I get a raw deal from life. True. Someone has it in for me. True. I believe I'm being plotted against. True. I believe I'm being followed. True. I feel I've often been punished without cause. True. It is safer to trust nobody. True. Given Michael's situation now and the circumstances he are in, this is all reality-based. This is not a delusion or a psychosis. This is what he's experiencing right now. There's a couple of other ones. Someone has it in for me. True. I believe I'm being plotted against. True. I believe I'm being followed. True. I believe I'm being talked about. True. I have no enemies who really wish to harm me. False. People say insulting and vulgar things about me. True. Every one of these is reality-based. And so when you get in MMPI, you have to use your common sense. You don't throw your common sense out and not look at what he responded to. That's what you have to do. And when you do it, you see all of those are reality-based. There is no basis at all to conclude that the results in the MMPI shows paranoid psychosis. It does not. It absolutely does not.
Doctor, you didn't render a diagnosis based on your administering the MMPI or the results you got from that test?
Of course not. You never, no diagnosis from a psychological test, none.
Before I ask you about the other two tests that you gave, Doctor, did you also review Dr. Hassan's results on the PAI?
Yes. Now, the PAI, it's called the Personality Assessment Inventory. This is a good test. Now, I mentioned the Exeter bad test, bad scoring system, Rorschach good test, but system is bad. The MCMI, the Milan Clinical Multi-Axle Inventory, he also gave, which is a terrible test, shouldn't use. But this is a good test, the Personality Assessment Inventory. I don't know of any research article that said otherwise. It's like the MMPI, basically, a little shorter, and it's very good. Now, when you look at this test, I think it's 17 pages long. I'm not 100% sure.
Judge, for the record, the doctor's referring to what's been marked as S436 for
Thank you.
identification.
All right, thank you.
Now, you look at this, and again, this on the cover sheet here says what all of these say. And I'm going to just read the beginning of it. It says, interpreted information contained in this report should be viewed only as one source of hypotheses about the individual being evaluated. Do you see that same in all of these tests? These are hypotheses, suggestions. You don't make a diagnosis based on a test. But anyway, when you look at this test, I open up the first page, and what do I see on the top in bold capital letters? Warning, validity scales indicate hypotheses may not be valid. It doesn't say, consider this, take a look at this, by the way, bullet point. No, warning. And so this is on the top of the page. Every page, every single page of the 17 pages has it in bold print, in capital letters on the top, warning. And then you go to the actual validity scales, because there's a whole validity of the test results. Now, you don't use any other validity measures other than this validity measure. This is the validity measure used by the test itself. So when you look at this, and I'm on page 9,
And doctor, just to remind the jury, when you say the validity of the results, what does that mean?
it means the validity of the results that they found in this test. Warning, it may not be accurate.
So this is the test that was given to Michael Barisone, and the test results indicate the validity is questionable.
More than questionable. No, when you put warning on something, to me, that's more than questionable. They didn't say results are questionable, take another look. No, they said warning. And then they get into it on page 9, the last paragraph. The degree to which response styles may have affected or distorted the report of symptomatology on the inventory is also assessed. It means they're doing this. Certain of these indicators fall outside the normal range, suggesting that the respondent may not have answered in a completely forthright manner. The nature of his responses might lead the evaluator to form a somewhat inaccurate impression of the client based upon the style of responding below. And then it goes on the next page, and again, this is in capital letters. The test results potentially involve considerable distortion and are unlikely to be an accurate reflection of the respondent's objective clinical status. The following interpretation is provided only as an indication of the respondent's description. And then it goes on.
Doctor, in that same paragraph, is there anything in that paragraph about malingering?
Well, yes. Right above that it says, with respect to negative impression management. Impression management is a word means people try to manage their impression to other people. Patients do it, defendants do it all the time. Negative impression management is you want to appear more disturbed than you actually are. Positive impression management is you want to appear less disturbed than you actually are. So here it says, with respect to negative impression management, appearing more disturbed, there are indications suggesting that the client tended to portray himself in an especially negative or pathological manner. Some deliberate distortion of the clinical picture may be present. The critical items should be reviewed to evaluate the possibility of malingering. And then it goes on. The important point is, where is that in his report? I read his report and he said the validity indicators are great and here we go. That's not true. I mean, come on now. Again, I don't want to be disrespectful, and it's a little uncomfortable doing it because someone told me he's actually in the courtroom. So I feel a little uncomfortable doing it, but anyway, you know.
Doctor, let me ask you, you just used the term malingering there.
Yeah.
Can you tell the jury what that term means and where it comes from?
Faking an illness. It's as simple as that. A little boy doesn't want to go to school because he didn't study for his arithmetic test, tells his mother he has a stomach ache. A person with a mental disorder wants to feign mental symptoms for obvious legal reasons.
And without jumping ahead too far, did you find evidence in this case of malingering in the defendant's case?
I didn't find any evidence of malingering. Dr. Hassan did, but didn't report it as such.
Let me ask the question a little more pointedly. Did you find any evidence of malingered amnesia?
Oh, malingered amnesia, yes. Yeah, not malingering. Yeah, yes, I found malingered amnesia, absolutely. But not malingering a mental disorder.
And can you explain the difference between what you just answered and what I had asked?
Well, malingering generally means to malinger an illness, to malinger a disorder. Malingered amnesia is different. That's when you claim you don't remember what had been done. Malingered amnesia, I mean, I can go into it a lot of detail, but yeah, that's simply.
It can mean different things in different situations.
Malingered amnesia means only one thing. It means you're feigning loss of memory. That's what it means.
Doctor, I want to direct your attention at this point to the last two tests that you gave to Michael Barisone. Mm-hmm. Can you tell the jury what the TAT is?
The TAT is the thematic apperception test. This is an old test from the 1930s. It shows pictures of all sorts of people in ambiguous situations. And your job is to create a story. And in the process of the story, hopefully you'll reveal yourself and more information about you will emerge. Just give me a second.
Doctor, there is some water.
Yeah, no, I'm fine.
Water.
Yeah,
Sure,
thanks,
there's
Judge,
water
yeah.
there. It should be fresh too if you need it.
No, I'm fine. I give the TAT. TAT is not scored. This is a projective test. And you interpret it at the level of face validity. Face validity means, on the face of it, can you understand what's going on within the person? So, for example, if a patient says, there's a person leaning over a couch, crying, thinking of suicide, her life is terrible, this is the end. You got a good idea of what's coming from the person's mind. You don't need a score for that, a scoring system at all. So I gave Michael that test, and he gave themes involving depression, despair, loss of hope, inner conflict, suicide, interpersonal loss, and significant inner turmoil. There was really nothing particularly outstanding. There's no question Michael's depressed. There's no dispute, in my opinion, anyhow, of that.
Did you also give him a projective test?
Well, that was a projective test. I gave him another one called the projective figure drawings. This is a very simple test. You just ask people to draw a picture of a house, a tree, a person of the opposite sex, and the worst thing you could think of. Usually you get nothing, not much. Like in this case, you really don't get much of anything.
And what do you mean by that?
Well, nothing really significant, for example. So you ask a person to draw a picture of a house because a house is very important to people. That's where you live. If you ever drove past a home that you grew up in, and your parents sold it, and new people lived there, you get a funny feeling because your ego boundaries extend beyond you to your house. So it's important. Tree, person, opposite sex, and the worst thing you think of. Usually you get not much, but sometimes you do. And I gave I don't know if it,
What would be an example of a significant drawing?
well, I gave you some drawings that I've included in a chapter that I wrote, and I have a lot of these in my book, of dismembered people, exposed genitals, violence, and this sort of thing. Those are significant. Now, I didn't have that here. You interpret it at a level of face validity. And most competent people do that. Now, in Dr. Hassan's report, he referred to a number of people, which I thought was quite interesting because a number of the people they referred to as experts, I not only know these people, I've worked with them. About 4 of them wrote forwards to my book. And he referred to one of my books. He referred to Reed Malloy, who is a very prominent person. And he wrote a forward to one of my books, wrote a chapter in another book, and I wrote a chapter in one of his. But I gave you an article, I don't know if this came out, where he shows a picture, a figure drawing that's very illustrative, which he put in an article that he published. So, to say that this isn't done is just incorrect.
Now, Doctor, I want to ask you about your particular diagnoses or conclusions in this case. And you had already mentioned early on the DSM.
Right.
You mentioned that there are different editions over the course of time. Can you just explain to the jury, in your own words, what the significance of the DSM is to your field?
Well, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders is really the manual that lays out the diagnostic criteria for all of the diagnoses. And they go through different revisions. The DSM-5, I think it was 2013, is the latest revision, but there'll be another one in a couple of years. Why? Because research comes in, you understand things more, it's developing, it's evolving, and so it changes. And it's been around, DSM-1 was published in 1952. And this is the way you make a diagnosis. You use the criteria delineated in the DSM. Now, when I make a diagnosis in a forensic case, I do it with the manual open. Because who can memorize this? Nobody can memorize this manual. How are you going to know? And so I do it with the manual open, and I remember distinctly, I said to Michael, because sometimes people wonder, what are you bringing this big book out for? I said, I don't want to make a mistake. And I simply just go in through all of the criteria and evaluated him with all the criteria, all the diagnoses that were raised in this case.
You indicated that the DSM-5 is the 5th edition over the course of time. What's your understanding of how, or the process that goes into a new edition coming out?
Over the course of, let's say, 10, 15 years, research is published, And the DSM folks will put together a committee on each different diagnosis. They'll brainstorm as to what the research tells us, and then they'll make modifications to try to keep everything up to date and, best practices, and so on.
Now, you said that when you conducted your examination of Michael Barisone, you were aware of Dr. Simring's diagnoses?
Yes.
Did you consider a number of diagnoses in addition to what Dr. Simring found?
Yes.
Why did you do that?
Because other diagnoses were raised in the case, and I wanted to do a thorough job and make sure I considered everything.
What does the term psychosis mean?
Psychosis simply means a break with reality, and it's manifested by symptoms such as hallucinations and delusions. Hallucinations are perceptual. Auditory hallucination, you hear voices. Visual hallucinations, you see things that aren't there, usually of religious content. Olfactory hallucinations, you smell horrible smells, rotting flesh. Gustatory hallucinations, horrible tastes in your mouth, metal. Tactile hallucinations, bugs crawling under my skin. Those are hallucinations. Delusions are false beliefs not based in reality. So, for example, if you think 2 and 2 is 6, that's not a delusion, you're incorrect. But if you think 2 and 2 is 6 because Martians changed the number system, that's a delusion, because there's a break with reality. That's a bizarre delusion. Now, there's some non-bizarre delusions that can actually occur in daily life. The difference being Martians is not an occurrence in daily life, but other things are, and you could develop a delusion. So I'll give you an example to illustrate a non-bizarre delusion. I know of a case of a middle-aged guy, worked at a large company. He was a manager of like a unit, and the company was going through some sort of inspection or review, and he slowly developed an idea that the administration of the company the company was going to fail this review or inspection. They were going to blame him for it. They're all plotting now to blame him. He'll lose his job. He'll never get another job, and his life will be completely destroyed. And when he said things similar to that to his coworkers, they said to him, "No, what are you talking about? Everything is fine. The company's not going to be fail. No one's trying to get rid of you." And his response was, "You don't understand. You just don't understand." That's very typical in a delusion. The people in your circle around you try to dissuade you of this delusional belief.
In that example you just gave, was there any initial trigger for him having that delusion?
It was insidious. It was insidious as to why that happened. But all of that went on for an extended period of time, a couple of months. He became more and more delusional with respect to this conspiracy. And what finally happened is he's walking down the hall, and the head, I guess the president or the head administrator, said to him, "Good morning, doctor. Good morning, doctor. Good morning, Mr. Bailey." And that was it. Because he told his friends, "He always called me Bob, and today he called me Mr. Bailey." See? You see the sign? That's a delusion. That's a delusion. That's a non-bizarre delusion, because, people get fired from their jobs. But this was a break with reality. So that's essentially what a delusion is, a fixed false belief not based in reality.
Now, before we get to some of your diagnoses, doctor, you indicated that you were aware of Dr. Simring's diagnoses,
Yes,
and you're aware that he diagnosed the defendant with delusional disorder, persecutory type, and depression disorder.
yes.
With respect to depression disorder, would that affect a person's ability to know right from wrong?
Generally, no.
Would that affect a person's ability to know and appreciate the nature and quality of their acts?
No, generally no, but I should say I disagreed with Dr. Simring with respect to his diagnosis of depression.
Can you explain that?
Yeah, Dr. Simring diagnosed Michael as having a persistent depressive disorder. That's essentially a chronic low-grade depression, like a characterological depression, like a person who's like dyspeptic, a downer. I disagreed. I think he had recurrent major depressive episodes, and I based it on a number of factors, including I read the text messages from years ago with Ann Picardo, his long-term therapist. And it's way more than persistent depression. So I disagree with Dr. Simmering with respect to depression. I think he had a more significant area of depression intermittently or recurrently.
Now, with respect to the diagnosis of delusional disorder, are you aware of the delusion that Dr. Simmering identified?
I'm not exactly sure of the delusion Dr. Simmering identified. I mean, he said it a couple different ways. It's not 100% clear. All these Facebook postings that Lauren put on the internet, Dr. Simmering asked him essentially, what do you think of those? And he said they were harassing and annoying. And Dr. Simmering in his report said, I disagree with him. They were coded messages where he thought Lauren was going to kill him. Or so, I think that's what he said. But there was no, from what I read his report, there was no real clear delineation of what exactly this delusion was. But anyway, but there's no basis for that at all.
Well, did you find any evidence of delusions based on your examination of Michael Barisone?
No, I found no evidence of this at all. And here's what's important with respect to a delusion. This may have got lost in the translation here. A delusion is not a fear. If you're frightened, if you're terrified, that is not a delusion. That's an emotional state. A delusion is a false belief not based in reality, and those in your circle try to dissuade you of it, like I mentioned with the guy with the company. In this particular case, the people in his circle, whether it was Mary Haskins or Ruth Cox, they agreed with him about Lauren's dangerousness. If you listen to Mary Haskins' interview with the police, you don't have to go beyond 5 minutes. She sits down, she tells what her name is and where she's from, and the first thing she said is, we're terrified for our lives. Is Mary Haskins delusional too? And at the end of Mary Haskins' statement to the police, you have to listen to the very end because it's about an hour where nothing, she's just sitting there in a room. At the very end, she said, I don't know where I'm going to stay tonight. I can't stay at the farm because Lauren's father is going to come and kill me. Is that a delusion? I mean, she's now delusional? Look what Ruth Cox said. Ruth Cox said multiple times, Lauren is dangerous. Lauren's going to not give up until she gets what she wants. Lauren is going to, said to Michael, Lauren's going to set you up for sexual assault because she knows it's not defensible. Get her out of here. She's dangerous. Now, Ruth Cox is also dangerous? You mean everybody's delusional there? Nobody's delusional there. Are they frightened? Yes, but that is not a delusion. That's not a break with reality.
Now, did you ask Michael Barisone about the pressure that he was feeling with respect to Mr. Goodwin and Ms. Canarak being at the property?
Yes, I mean, there was a long-standing conflict there. There was an interpersonal conflict between Michael and Lauren right from the beginning when they were in Florida. Keep in mind, they met in Florida. Lauren came from North Carolina. They met in Florida. There was interpersonal problems in Florida. They went to New Jersey, more interpersonal problems. They went back to Florida, more interpersonal problems. At this point, if you're so delusional that a person's going to kill you, why do you let him back to New Jersey? They're down in, it's a perfect break time. You're down in Florida. We're done. We're not doing any more training. Take your horses, put them in North Carolina, but our training is over. You graduated or something like that. Why let him back? He told me why he let him back. He said he needed the money. He said, I was under financial pressure. He had a divorce going on. He said, you have difficult clients. Everybody has difficult clients. You have to learn to deal with it, and so on. So he let him back. So he wasn't that frightened of her. He wasn't that terrified of her if he let her back.
Did you ask him about the social media posts?
Yes.
And did you review a number of those posts yourself?
I reviewed all of the social media posts.
How did he characterize the posts when you interviewed him?
Well, he told Dr. Summery they're annoying and harassing, and that Dr. Summery thought they were coded messages. He thought that the manifesto was killing the king was him, and Mary Haskins was the queen, and there was this conflict between them. And Lauren's very, I never met Lauren, I don't know anything about Lauren, but just read these posts. She's obviously very bright and very creative. And so she's writing all these things out in symbolism, and that's how he interpreted it. I can see how he interpreted that. That's nothing distorted about it. I see how he interpreted that. I think it's very reasonable interpretation.
Now, moving ahead to closer in time to the date of the shooting, did you ask Michael Barisone about when he first obtained Ruth Cox's gun?
Yes, but I have to refer to my report somewhere because I'm not.
It's on page 47, Doctor.
Oh, okay, hold on for a second. Yes. Yes, I asked him.
And what did he tell you about Ruth Cox's gun?
Well, Ruth said in her statement that Michael asked to see her gun several days before the shooting. And I asked him about that. He said, I didn't ask to see her gun. And he explained that Ruth Cox came there on August 2nd, and Michael knew she traveled with a gun, and he felt it wasn't safe in the car with Lauren there. And so Ruth gave me the gun, and it went in the safe. That's what he told me.
What's the significance, if that answer is accurate, what's the significance of that answer?
Well, the significance is he had the gun, and that's the gun that was used in the shooting.
Does it show anything with respect to the nature and quality of his actions?
Does it show with nature to quality of actions with respect to what?
Does it show anything with respect to whether he appreciates or knows the nature and quality of his actions?
Well, certainly knows the nature and quality of his acts, what a gun is, put it in the safe, of course, absolutely. And also, the gun was in a case and the ammunition was not loaded. Dr. Ruth said that, and Michael said that.
Did you ask him about when the town came to the property? I believe that's on page 48 of your report, Doctor.
Yes. I asked him about the fire safety complaint, is that what you're referring to?
Yes.
Yes, I asked him about that. And he said, we had a house, our home was under construction, minor issues, and Goodwin turned it in.
Is there anything delusional about anything with respect to that?
No, not at all.
Why not?
Just isn't. It's all reality based. The Goodwin did turn it in. The guy came. They condemned part of the residents. And that was it. It all actually happened. This is not in his mind. This happened.
Now, are there different types of delusional disorder according to the DSM?
Yes.
Can a person with delusions know the difference between right and wrong?
Depends on the case.
Can a person with delusions know the nature and quality of their actions?
Usually, yes.
Now, moving on, Doctor, and in the event I hadn't asked you this, just so I make sure I don't forget, are any diagnoses that you rendered within a reasonable degree of psychological certainty?
All of them that I rendered are within that.
Now, you already told us about your diagnosis for depression.
Yes.
Did you render a diagnosis related to personality disorder?
Yes. Could you give me a page number, counsel?
Page 64.
64. Yes, I did.
What is personality disorder?
Personality disorder is, everybody has a personality, and a personality disorder is when the traits are characteristic in one way. It's simple as that. I looked at him, I believe he has a personality disorder, and I found that the two traits that are most characteristic of him are obsessive-compulsive traits with a preoccupation for detail, order, organization, and control, devotion to work, inflexibility with respect to morality and ethics, and reluctance to delegate to others. I got this right. This is from the manual. I'm not just making that up. I went right through the criteria in the DSM, and he meets the criteria for that. Obsessive-compulsive personality. Again, it's not bad. It's just characterizing the way he is. A lot of successful people have obsessive-compulsive traits. And I also found deep feelings of inadequacy. I mean, if you look at this case in its entirety, inadequacy and low self-esteem always emerges. It comes out. It was certainly in Ann Picardo's text messages and notes. He said, and even in a text to Mary Haskins, he said, "I know I'm repulsive to you as a man." And when I questioned him directly, he showed feelings of inadequacy as well. So I think the traits that best characterize Michael are obsessive-compulsive traits and inadequate traits.
With respect to the personality disorder diagnosis, would that have affected his ability to know right from wrong on the day of the shooting?
No, not at all.
Would it have affected his ability to know or appreciate the nature and quality of his actions?
No, not at all.
The last questions I'm going to ask you about, Doctor, you had referenced earlier malingered amnesia.
Yes,
And I know you talk about this in your report on pages 66 and 67.
right.
Can you remind us what malingered amnesia is?
Okay, well, malingering is simply faking an illness. Now, the DSM is it's very important because what they say is, and I'll refer to this on page 66 of my report, the essential feature of malingering is the intentional production of false symptoms, like memory loss, motivated by external incentives, such as, this is from the DSM, evading criminal prosecution. And the DSM also notes that malingering should be strongly suspected, not just suspected. I think that's possibly the only place in the manual where they use the word strongly suspected, not consider it, think about it, take a look at it. No, strongly suspected if you have some of these factors. The individual is referred by an attorney. Criminal charges are pending. A marked discrepancy between the individual's claimed disability and objective findings and observations. Lack of cooperation in the evaluation, that didn't apply, and in presence of antisocial personality, that didn't apply. But his claimed disability is, he claimed that he doesn't have memory only for the criminal behavior. Only for his memory for everything else is excellent. Are you kidding? Day by day, in some cases hour by hour, as to what happened. So, I considered first whether this is dissociative amnesia. I just didn't jump to a conclusion, this is malingered amnesia. But I will say, malingered amnesia is very common in criminal cases. Dissociative amnesia means you forget something, and that can occur in a trauma. So I considered that.
Why didn't you diagnose that?
Because I don't think it's correct. I think that this is malingered amnesia for the reasons that I just said. You see, if you have good memory like he does, and the only thing you forget is criminal conduct, that's a red flag, because there's no memory disorder or neurocognitive disorder that is selective just for criminal conduct. So what does he not remember? Getting the gun, loading the gun, driving to where Lauren was, initially hiding the gun under his shirt, asking for a Goodwin to get Lauren. Lauren comes out. He said to her, "Are we going to resolve this or do we go to war?" And then he shot her twice. And then he has no memory for anything else until he said he wakes up at the hospital with a big light on him and people are touching his arm and his head injury. But there's something very odd about that. First of all, the only thing you don't remember is the criminal behavior. Why is that? Why isn't if it's a trauma, why isn't everything blocked out? Also, when you go to the hospital, now just think, you go to a hospital, you don't have any memory of anything, you wake up in the hospital with a big light on you and the staff are touching you, the first thing you say is, "Where the hell am I? Well, what's going on here? Why am I here?" He didn't say that. He didn't say that at all. And they asked him, "What happened?" He said, "I don't remember." But what about the supposed delusion that she was going to kill him? That he didn't, if he doesn't remember getting the gun and shooting her, did he forget that he thought she was going to kill him? Really? And so the memory is not just for the criminal back, it's also for the supposed delusion? Well, why didn't you say, I don't know, I don't remember anything, but I know some woman's trying to kill me. That didn't happen. That didn't happen at all.
Doctor, is there any difference between malingered amnesia and feigned amnesia?
It's basically the same.
Judge, may I have a moment?
Sure.
Doctor, was this shooting difficult for you to understand?
The shooting is not difficult to understand. It's a very easy to understand case.
Judge, I have no further questions at this time.
All right, cross-examination.
Doctor, you currently have another case with the Morris County Prosecutor's Office that you're consulting on, correct?
Correct.
Now, in this particular case, you indicated that you spent a total of 13.25 hours with regards to your contact with my client, correct?
Yes.
And how much of that 13 hours was done with testing?
Probably the first hour or two, maybe?
So you did about an hour or two of testing with regards to your evaluation, correct?
About that, I mean, you were there. I didn't time it, but you were there. Maybe you timed it.
Now, the rest of the time, you basically let Michael talk about this incident, correct?
Well, that's probably not a completely accurate description of what I did. I let him talk, but it was a response to my questions. So it wasn't just a free flow, tell me what you think. I had a lot of pointed questions.
Okay, now, the testing that you did, would you agree that you did the short version of a number of tests?
I did the abbreviated version of the Wechsler intelligence test, and I did the standard first 370 basic questions for the MMPI.
Now, how many questions did you give for the MMPI?
370.
And how many possible questions could you have given?
Well, could I have given? I would have to interpret this test very differently. That's about, I don't even know, maybe 500? I don't even know.
Over 500.
Could be over 500, yeah.
What- Are you saying you don't know the exact?
I don't know the exact number because I don't give the complete version. I give the version that I give.
Well, now, in your discussions with Michael, you indicated in your report that the problems, the conflict with Lauren Cataract started in Florida in 2019, correct?
It was 2018, but I could be wrong.
Okay. If you refer to page 4 of your report, fifth line down, is in effect you indicated on around May of 2019, they returned to New Jersey, and then later on mentioned that the conflict between the parties seemed to have begun in Florida.
The conflict began in Florida, I believe it was 2018. If you look on page 3 in the bottom, she was training in North Carolina. Then Lauren attended the Florida horse facility in the winter of 2018, received training there 2 to 3 months. That's where conflicts began. And then
What
April.
conflicts began in 2018?
Yeah, that's what I said, in Florida.
So what conflict?
Oh, interpersonal conflicts. There was interpersonal conflicts with respect to who was going to do the training. Was it Michael? Was it Justin? The interpersonal conflicts.
And would you agree that in May of 2019, things started to get worse? The conflict grew more severe, correct?
Yes.
So, without question, this conflict, this stress lasted well over 1 month, correct?
Definitely.
Now, did you discuss with Michael different things that he did to try to protect himself and everyone else at the facility.
Were you referring to something specific, counsel?
For instance, like him hiring Bug Sweep.
Yes, he hired Bug Sweep.
Hired a private investigator to do a criminal background check on him.
Yes,
And he also hired an individual by the name of Larry David to sit at the top of the property in front of the stable to protect the people inside at night.
correct.
Now, you said you reviewed all the social media posts.
Yes.
How many of them were there?
I don't know.
Estimate,
Thousands.
tens of thousands?
I don't know. I got big binders. Maybe the prosecutor has an exact
How thick were
account.
your binders regarding social media posts?
Thick binders.
How many binders?
I don't know how many binders. I can't remember. Multiple binders.
When you say multiple, do you have any specific recollection of how many social media posts you looked through?
I don't have a specific recollection as to how many social media posts, except that I read all of them. Now, with respect to the number of binders, ask them. I have them at home, but I didn't count them. I just don't know the exact number.
Now, you'll agree with me that with regards to the test that you gave, there are people that question the validity of all of these tests.
When you say there are people, what do you mean by that?
Just a group of people that, if you want to attack a test, there are people out there for every single test that you gave where people question the validity and use of that test in
Yes,
making a determination.
yes, I would answer it more precisely. I would say that's how science progresses. People do tests, people do research, they question it, and then you move on.
And would you agree with me that this is a fluid science? Things change, the way tests are given changes?
The way tests are given are changes, but some conclusions with respect to lack of validity are definitive, and it's conclusive.
Now, you didn't put in your report everything that you reviewed.
I
You
put,
normally not do that?
I never do that. I say I review the entire state's case. And I ask for the entire state's case.
How many videotape statements did you review?
I reviewed all of them that I had.
How many did you
I
review?
don't remember what the exact number is, but let me think if I could, from my memory. Lauren's statement. The defendant didn't give a statement. Justin Hardin gave a statement. Ruth Cox gave a statement. Mary Haskins gave a statement. Dee Franco, I can't remember her name, gave a statement. Who else? I don't know. There may have been another one. I just can't recall it offhand. Those are the major players, although DeFranco not that much.
Now, your position is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, that Michaels believes that Lauren Canarak was going to kill him, Mary Haskins, and her children is a rational, realistic fear.
Oh, I didn't say it was rational and realistic, but it's not delusional. It was based on what was going on at the time. To be very, very specific, though, counsel, with respect to his belief of Lauren killing him, that had absolutely nothing to do with the shooting, because at the day of the shooting, he said nothing about that. He said, are we going to resolve this, or do we go to war, and then shot her? It was nothing like, you think you're going to kill me, I'll kill you first, or something, what you usually have in these sorts of confrontations. And it was triggered by the child investigator coming. That's what triggered the whole thing. It wasn't triggered the day before by the fire department coming. It was triggered by the investigator. Who wouldn't be upset if he incorrectly thought that Lauren called child protection? She didn't, but that's what he thought. But hold on, counsel.
Hold on. Just ask another question. Sometimes we get a little too far afield, doctor. We got to reel it in. Question, answer counsel's question. Don't deviate too much. Go ahead, ask another question.
You're saying Lauren Cataract did not call DCPP.
My understanding is that Safe Sport called DCCP. That's
Now,
my,
did you review all of Lauren Cataract's text messages?
yes.
Were you aware that she had Googled?
Judge, objection.
And ask another question, please.
Did you review the social media post where Lauren Cataract talked about going to war?
I don't have a specific recollection of that statement, but I reviewed the social media post, yes.
Do you have a specific recollection of reviewing posts where she accused them of criminal conduct online?
I know that there was Michael told me of an accusation that she accused him of insurance fraud and animal abuse, I think, and something else, so I'm aware of that.
Okay, but you don't have a recollection of reviewing those
All right,
documents, correct?
but his review of the document isn't really an issue, Mr. Blankus. I've been saying that for a long time now. The issue is what's in the defendant's mind.
Right.
So his statements are what's pertinent, so you should characterize or ask
Understood.
questions aimed at that issue.
Understood. Did Michael tell you that he thought that Lauren Cataract was dangerous?
Yes.
Now, you indicated that other people on the farm felt the same way.
Yes.
would you agree with me that no one felt that way to the extent that Michael Barisone did?
Well, I would disagree to the extent that Mary Haskins certainly felt that because she said our life is in danger, and then she thought additionally that Lauren's father would come kill her. So that's pretty strong.
And it's your belief that those beliefs of Mary Haskins were the exact same extent as what Michael Barisone felt?
I can't
Judge,
tell you.
I'm going to object. It's asking for state of mind of other people.
Yeah. Based on not an interview of her, but on listening to an interview. So, objection sustained.
And is it your belief that those threats that Michael Barisone believed had a real, rational basis for him to believe them?
What threats?
That she was going to kill him, Mary Haskins, and the children.
This is what he interpreted from the post. This interpretation was supported by Mary Haskins and Ruth Cox.
Now, did Michael tell you that the reason why he took the gun from Cox was he believed it was unsafe to be in the car because he was afraid Lauren or Robert Goodwin would break into the car and get access to that weapon?
Yes, he told me that.
And do you believe that he was feigning when he told you that?
No, I don't believe he was feigning. I think no. The answer is no.
Now, with regards to your opinion that Michael is feigning amnesia as to not remembering the event, would you agree with me that during the incident, he was beaten about the head?
No, that was post-incident. That was after the shooting. He shot Lauren twice, shot at Goodwin. Goodwin tackled him, punched him in the head, put him in a chokehold, and whatever else he did. That was afterwards.
Okay, and that...
And that's according to your review of the discovery.
Correct.
Just so we're clear on the record.
Yeah, yes, correct.
That comes from the statements of Goodwin and Canarak, correct?
Yeah, that was after the shooting. Yeah, he didn't hit him in the head before the shooting.
Irrespective of when he received that beating, would you agree that an extensive beating to someone's head could cause amnesia?
Possible, but not selective amnesia.
Now, would you agree with me that within moments after the incident, when the police and the first aid people respond, that Michael Barisone had indicated virtually to every single person that questioned him?
But Mr. Belenkas, just if there's a specific, I don't like when you make a broad statement like
Okay.
that, all right? Just ask if your recollection tied to the evidence in the case. All right, go ahead. Rephrase your question, please.
Are you aware that with regards to the documents that were provided to you, that immediately after the incident, that every single person that Michael...
Oh, wait a second. Am I talking to myself? You don't characterize it every single person.
Okay.
I said tie it to a specific witness. You can go through each of the witnesses. I don't mind if you're doing that, but you can't just say
Understood, Judge.
everybody because
Understood.
I'm not sure that was the testimony.
Doctor, are you aware that with regards to the first aid people, that Michael Barisone, when asked about the event, said he could not recall anything concerning the event?
My recollection is with the EMT person, he made a statement that a person was going to come to the farm and take my kids away. That's my recollection.
And in addition to that, that he had no recollection of the specific event after that?
That's what he said to the EMT people. After the shooting and before the police came, or as the police came, he made fatalistic statements. I have it in my report, but I can't recall something like "My life is over. I had a good life. They took it all away." fatalistic statements. Those statements indicate that he remembered what happened. Because he didn't say what happened. He didn't say arrest Goodwin. He just attacked me.
Did any document that you read indicate that when they first arrived, he was partially conscious?
Yes.
Did any document indicate to you that he was incoherent?
Some did, some did not. Hold on, counsel.
Counsel, hold on a second. Just answer his question, please. All right? That's
Isn't it
it.
the fact that with respect to all the medical records, they indicated that he was confused and he had an altered mental state?
Some medical records said that, and the police record said something different.
And didn't one police report indicate that at one point he says, "Is this real? I need to wake up"?
I believe he said that in the ambulance.
You're sure about that?
That's my recollection. I questioned him about that, and it's in my report with respect to that.
Okay, now, you're aware that Michael Barisone had seen Ann Picardo over a 20-year period, correct?
Correct.
Did you ever talk to her?
No.
I have nothing further.
All right, any,
No, Your Honor.
all right, you may step down. Thank you.
Judge.
All right, any further witnesses on rebuttal?
No, Judge.
All right, so the state rests on rebuttal. Do you have one more witness in sir rebuttal?
Could I have one?
Let me see that sidebar. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to ask for your indulgence. Mr. Belinkis has what he says, and the prosecutor agrees will be a short sir rebuttal witness as we refer to it. We're going to try to get it done today because that is going to be the last witness. We'll complete our testimony today. Counsel and I have some legal matters to go over tomorrow, so you're going to have the day off from this trial tomorrow. You're going to come back Monday for summations and charge, and then deliberations will follow thereafter. All right, so we're going to have one quick witness tonight, and we're going to get it done as quick as possible. It shouldn't be too long. Go ahead, Mr. Belinkis.
Defense calls Dr. Hassan back to the stand.
All right, left hand on the Bible again, doctor, please.
Do you swear in the presence of Almighty God that the testimony given to this court regarding this matter shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please state your name and spell your last name for the record.
My name is Charles Hasson, Hasson.
Thank you.
All right, you may have a seat, doctor. Go ahead, Mr. Belinkis.
Dr. Hassan, I'm going to try to ask you some very specific questions. And if you could answer as succinct and direct as possible, to save some time. You heard Dr. Schlesinger testify with regards to you scoring his test of the MMPI, correct?
Yes,
And why did you use his scores?
it was an existing test. I wanted to I wanted to compare his scores to my scores and to see if there was any kind of discrepancy.
Okay, and was there any discrepancy?
Well, first of all,
Answer yes or no, please.
no discrepancy.
Okay, and what did you find with regards to your scoring using his data,
On which test?
the MMPI I'm
Okay.
referring to?
Found a very elevated score on the scale, remarkably elevated, scale 90. Scale 6 with a T-score of 90, which suggests delusional disorder. Secondly, I also found an elevation on a scale that indicates persecutory ideas. Then I also scored other scales on there that all point in the direction of a delusion.
Okay, did you hear his testimony basically saying that that score of 90 means nothing?
That's
Well,
not what he said, Judge.
Yeah, it's
Well,
not exactly what he
That
said.
that he didn't agree with your interpretation of that 90 score. Did you hear his testimony?
yes, I heard that.
And what's your response to that?
I think that he should be more familiar with the literature on that test. It's now 500 questions, 567. And as I indicated earlier today, the particular person who I referenced, James Butcher, he said that you should look up the references in order to understand that. And I indicated the things from Nichols, David Nichols. But basically, I can totally defend any position that a score of so elevated score on scale 6 is indicative of a delusional disorder.
Right, now, with regards to his testimony concerning the Rorschach, you heard that, correct?
May I just add something? This is very important. In the book that was shown to me yesterday by Butcher, Butcher said, under no circumstances should you play around with hand scoring the test because it's too vulnerable to make errors. That was the reason I ran through the test a second time rather than use his scores. I compared it.
Okay, let's move to the Rorschach.
Okay.
Okay, with regards to the Rorschach, what, if any, problems did you identify with regards to his administration of that test?
Well, I don't, first of all, he used a non-standard approach, which is remarkable to me. He did not indicate where the percepts were located. You have to open up the book to find out where it's located. He eyeballed the data. In my opinion, that is a violation of being able to analyze tests in terms of being reliable and valid.
Okay, now, with regards to the TAT,
Basically, the TAT, he eyeballed the data. That test does not have any error scores in there. There's no validity, reliability, and the elephant in the room that I saw was the fact that on 2 of the cards, there were weapons in there. One was a rifle and one was a handgun, it looked like. And Mr. Barisone did not discuss that.
and what does that mean to you?
Well, I mean, if you accept the projective hypothesis that apparently Dr. Schlesinger, buys into, you'd ask yourself, why did the person ignore that? Is it part of a dissociation where you look at the environment and you see a stimulus? You don't see a stimulus because it's so stressful to you.
Okay,
Also, I'll try to keep it simple, stupid. Also, there was very few responses on that test. There was just 14 responses. Also, just to have everyone know, on the RPAS and by Meyer and the CS, trust me, those international norms are not considered valid. I mean, there's questions about it. There's a very low sample size on the international laws, and also on the extra. There are about 600 plus people on that. The people they studied on the international.
I'm going to cut you
All
off.
right, okay.
Don. As far as the HTP test that he talked about, what's your opinion as to how he did that?
A joke. It's eyeballing data. Anyone could come up with an opinion on that. There's no validity there.
Okay, doctor, he says he performed tests for about an hour to 2 hours. How long did you test Michael Barisone? How many hours?
I'd say maybe 7 hours. And then also, to score the Rorschach, You're talking about two and a half hours. That's a highly difficult test to score. All the data on the RPAS group comes from Exner. The Exner system was incorporated into the RPAS system. I don't know if he is aware of that.
Okay, now, finally, with regards to his comments concerning you administering the PAI test, and him reading those things with the, warning sign on the top of the page, what does that mean, and how did you interpret that test?
Simply, I don't think he knows the literature on terms of validity testing. He does not know the literature from Richard Rogers. I use Richard Rogers' cut scores. Richard Rogers and his group took into account standard error of the measurement. If you give a test, for example, okay, let's go on, if you want me to stop.
The Bender-Gestalt test.
Bender-Gestalt test is a joke in this kind of a case. Bender-Gestalt test has false negatives. That means I could be brain damaged and do perfectly well on that test. That's not an adequate test for organicity.
How about the WASI test?
Well, that's a joke too, I'm sorry to say. The WASI test and the Wechsler test, you know what they have in common? The name, Wechsler. It is known that the WASI test will typically elevate scores. That's why his scores are higher than my scores. That's one of the factors, but that's known. You should never give the WASI test if you're looking to give a complete, honest evaluation.
Nothing further, Judge.
What, cross-examination?
None, Judge.
All right, you may step down, thank you. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. You've heard all the testimony in this case. You don't have any other, rebuttal witnesses, do you, Mr. Belinkus?
No, Judge.
No, all right. You've heard all the testimony in this case. The next step will be summations of counsel and the charge by the court. We're not going to do that tomorrow for a number of reasons. Number one, counsel and I have to review the charge to make sure it's appropriate. And there are some legal issues that we have to go over with regard to the charge. And the second reason is I don't want to give you this case on a Friday afternoon late. It's been 2 weeks of testimony. We're on schedule. Actually, I think we're doing better than originally thought by counsel. So I'd rather have summations Monday when everyone's fresh. I'll give you the charge. You can have the case Monday and then Tuesday and however long you need next week. So we're going to break for today. I'll meet with counsel tomorrow to go over the charge. We'll get that finalized and we'll return Monday morning fresh, 9 o'clock, as always, for summations and the charge. All right, it's important now. You've heard all the testimony, so please don't discuss the case with anyone, and you'll have the case for deliberation very shortly. Thank you all. We'll see you Monday morning, same time. Off the record.